So, do most of you guys have your books? I heard that they were out again at the campus shop. I think I told them to get like 150, so I don't know. Maybe they didn't believe me. So we're going to be starting in your book today. So we'll start off with prayer, and then we'll watch a video. So we will invite the Lord to join us, and we'll get into it. All right, let's pray. Dearest Jesus, I thank you for each person here in this room, and I ask that you please walk alongside us through our classes and through work with our families, that you would just be in everything that we say and do, that we would ultimately glorify you. Father, thank you for this time that we get to share together, and I ask that you give us an open mind and an open heart. In your name I pray, amen. Okay. Raise your hand if I missed you and you need a copy of this health form.
I'm proud. Anyone else at the table?
Miss Allison. All right, so go ahead and open your book. We start on page 7. Thank you, Andrew. Oh, I'll get it from you. Okay, so on your own, take a minute to write down the first 5 words or phrases that come to your mind when you think of poverty. All right, let's bring it back. I would like to hear from you guys. Share something that you heard from someone else about defining poverty. Miss Nicole. Lacking. Okay. What else? What are some other words that describe poverty? I know all of your names, and I will call on you.
Hungry.
Miss Melanie. Oh.
Hungry.
Okay.
Less resources.
Less resources. Mm-hmm.
Discomfort.
This table here. Unmet needs. Yeah.
Struggling.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you guys for sharing. I'm going to give you guys a little bit more time and then answer those next 2 questions. If you had to describe the purpose of this short-term trip in 1 sentence, what would it be? And then the next question is, what are your personal goals for this trip? So 2 years from now, what are 2 things in your life and actions that you would like to be different as a result of going on this trip? So describe the purpose of this trip and then share your personal goals for this trip. All right. So I'd like to hear, tell us what trip you're going on and what do you think the purpose of that trip is. Ms. Lang.
I'm going to Bolivia,
Mm-hmm.
and I think the purpose of the trip that we're going on is to be able to share God's love with people and do that through meeting some of their needs.
Mm-hmm. Sarah.
I said 100 kilo, and I said to me about the physical and spiritual needs of people.
Someone else, please share where you're going and what you think the purpose of your trip is. Eden.
Learning, searching for how I can help others.
Search for how you can help others. Mm-hmm. All right. Would anyone else like to share? Okay. Can someone share what are your personal goals for this trip? How would you like your life to be different as a result of going on this trip? You guys are shy. All right, Allison.
I'll say learn to be more thankful with someone
Mm-hmm.
for like any small things.
Yeah, absolutely. Nicole?
I want to have a better understanding of the world and also see more clearly that this life is not about me.
Amen. Miss Londas.
Just to learn about like how to incorporate like serving God into like everyday life.
Yeah, absolutely. Ms. Butoy.
To experience a situation where I have to be totally dependent on God,
Hmm.
and I know I'm not in control of it.
Yes, I prophesy that will happen in your life. All right, would anyone else like to share goals for this trip? Okay. All right. So now we're going to watch this week's video, and we will reflect on it afterwards. No, there's not nap time. Okay, let me grab this.
Hi, I'm Kanisha. Welcome to Helping Without Hurting in Short-Term Missions. In this series of videos, you will be instructed by Steve Corbett and Brian Fickert of the Chalmers Center. Chalmers' vision is to equip local churches to declare and demonstrate to the world's poor that Jesus Christ is making all things new. This training is designed for short-term teams to experience together. The first 5 sessions will prepare you for your time in the field by challenging your view of poverty in the world and increasing your ability to bless the permanent workers in the field. Then, after you return from your trip, there will be debrief meetings and one last video session. This last session will guide you in processing the work that you saw God do and help you to avoid common post-mission pitfalls. We'll also encourage you to think through how you will move forward in engaging with poverty alleviation and missions. In today's session, we will start with Steve, the Chalmers Center's Community Development Specialist. He will challenge us to ask the right questions about short-term mission trips. Then Brian, the Chalmers Center's founder and president, will follow that up by teaching us how to correctly diagnose poverty and how to define what success looks like for a short-term visit.
We live in an exciting time in kind of the history of God's people. Our brethren in the majority world of Latin America, Asia, and Africa have not just grown in numbers, we're familiar with that, but they've grown in maturity and in zeal to minister in Christ's name. I know for myself, I've had the privilege of spending a lot of my last 30 years kind of doing Christian relief and development work and being on the field and being in main offices and seeing it at a lot of different levels. And it's just been really, really exciting for me personally to see the growing passion for people to really care for people that are hurting in really deep and dangerous and difficult ways. Whether that's in a slum in Rio de Janeiro, whether that's out in the rural community in Kenya, or whether that's in inner city of Detroit. People that just want to serve and minister to the poor in their own context. And to see that is just so invigorating. And we want to be aware of that and ask the question now, so what is the role, particularly of the North American church, coming in as outsiders and being part of this tremendous movement, this tremendous passion? And one thing that's been happening in the church over the last 20 years is the rise of short-term missions. And it's, first of all, important to note, this is a pretty new thing. Short-term mission trips have not been a key part of a strategic way of doing missions historically, has not been a key way of doing poverty alleviation historically. So we have to recognize it's new, but it's big. We have millions of people going every year, spending billions of dollars each year. And so we have to ask some questions about all of this. We know that the zeal is there. We know the intentions to serve are there. We have to ask the question, what is happening through these short-term mission trips? And I think there's a number of ways to kind of address that question, those questions. One is to ask the question, is this really helping the poor? What impact does it make when a group of people show up and do different work for a week, whether it's housing rehab or going in and working on helping build a school building, or even putting in a well, or doing vacation Bible schools, or whatever it might be. What's the impact of those on poverty over the long term? And so we have to look at that, and we will. A second question is it possible that the actual going and this doing these kinds of service projects, is it possible that that's actually hurting poor people? In some ways, making them poorer. And because of that question, to answer that, we've got to look deeply about what is poverty. and therefore what is good poverty alleviation, and that's going to be a key theme that we'll be looking at. A third issue is, what difference is it making in the lives of the people that are going? There's been this assumption that people go on these trips and they're life-changing in some way. And the reality is, the stats aren't showing that that's necessarily true, that people aren't necessarily on a large statistical level changing their perspectives, or at least changing their behaviors. They're not getting more involved in the issues of poverty alleviation. They're not giving more to the issues of poverty alleviation. They're going, having the trip, coming back, and basically getting on with life. And that leads to the last question, and that's a stewardship question. In economics, is the idea of opportunity cost. You spend money one way, you can't spend it another way. And so one of the issues is, what kind of money is being spent in short-term missions, and what else could potentially be done with that? The average cost of an international mission trip is $1,400 per person. So you get 20 people going on a trip somewhere for a week, it's about $28,000. What does that $28,000 represent? Well, for many ministries working in their context, in the majority world at least, an average salary would be $4,000, $6,000 a year. So $28,000, that's 7 people. That's 7 full-time staff ministering in those communities day in and day out over the course of a year. It's obvious which is going to have the deeper impact. Of course, it's the long-term workers. And so we shouldn't be ashamed that we're going. We shouldn't be feeling like, oh no, that's money thrown away, because we can steward it. We can turn and translate this and see this as an investment for something bigger over the long haul. And that's why we really want to encourage you to look at this trip as just one piece of a bigger process. It's a process of learning about what poverty is, learning of what good poverty alleviation is, learning what our appropriate roles of outsiders are, not just for the short term, but for the long term. We want people to learn and engage in the world of poverty and poverty alleviation, not for the week, but for the long haul. And that's why you've been asked to do pre-field training. That's why while you're on your trip, you're not going to just experience, you're going to do some reflective exercises around what you're seeing every day. And you're going to come back at the end, and this is where it makes all the difference. When you come back, seriously looking at the issue of, how do I move forward to steward this tremendous gift God has given me, this tremendous opportunity He gave me to go see a world that I don't always live in and work in, and then ask the question, how can I stand with my brothers and sisters as they minister in our Father's name?
How can giving food to someone who is hungry actually hurt them? Before we answer that, we need to look at how we define poverty. Many people define it as a simple lack of material things. Not enough food, money, clean water, medicine, or housing. But when you ask the materially poor to define poverty, you'll hear things like, I feel inferior, I feel ashamed, I feel powerless, I feel less than human, I feel like I cannot change my life. These feelings of shame, inferiority, and powerlessness are only made worse when we give handouts of food and clothing to them. No father's dignity is restored by seeing people providing things to his kids, things that he was unable to provide on his own. Poverty goes beyond the material and cuts to the core of how they view themselves, psychologically and socially. We often misdiagnose the problem or treat the symptoms instead of the underlying illness, and our help can actually be harmful, preventing them from getting better. That's when helping hurts. But the truth is, we are all poor. Everyone. We are all in need, because we all experience brokenness in the 4 fundamental relationships of life. Our relationship with God, self, others, and the rest of creation. These relationships are the building blocks of life. It starts with our relationship with God, the one from which the other 3 flow. Our relationship with self. We are created in God's image and have a high calling to reflect God's glory. Our relationship with others. We are made to love one another, know one another, and encourage one another to follow God's calling. And our relationship with creation. God created us to be stewards, to manage the world and sustain ourselves. But because of the fall, sin entered the world, and all 4 relationships were broken. Our intimacy with God was replaced by a fear of God. Our relationship with self went from a sense of dignity to feelings of shame. Our relationship with others went from community to conflict. And our relationship with creation went from joyful work to toilsome labor. Everyone suffers from the effects of these broken relationships. So we are all impoverished in the sense of not experiencing these relationships as God intended. It may not always look the same across the world, but we all share the same desperate need for Christ, who offers hope that what is broken, both inside us and around us, will be restored. Yes, sometimes we do need to provide food to people, but poverty alleviation is so much more than that. It involves reconciling the broken relationships at the root of poverty. It means taking the hungry person by the hand and saying, "I'm hungry too, but I've found the bread of life. He can provide the lasting help that you and I both need." Until our view of poverty changes, any help we offer is likely to do more harm than good.
So how should we go about alleviating poverty? You know, how we diagnose the disease of poverty determines the solutions that we use to alleviate that poverty. When you go to the doctor, the first thing the doctor does is try to diagnose what's wrong with you. And if the doctor misdiagnoses your problem, or if the doctor treats symptoms rather than underlying causes, you won't get better and you might get worse. The same is true when we work with the poor. If we misdiagnose the causes of poverty, our solutions won't help them to get better. In fact, we could do real harm in the process of trying to help them. Many short-term trips assume that poverty is fundamentally about a lack of material things. And because we think it's about a lack of material things, our approach tends towards giving material things to people, toys or clothing or food. We tend to think poverty is about a lack of stuff, and so we try to solve the problem with stuff. But what's so interesting is that if you ask poor people around the world what is poverty, they describe it differently. They describe it as a lack of dignity. They describe it as feeling inferior. They describe it as a sense of shame, or a lack of voice in the community, or a lack of an ability to affect change in their lives or in the community around them. The poor talk about a lack of material things, but they tend to describe their poverty in far more psychological or even social terms than we do. And that disconnect between how we think of poverty as a lack of stuff and how they experience poverty as brokenness and as shame is at the heart of a crisis in poverty alleviation work around the world. We've got to get the diagnosis correct. So what we want to do is to root our understanding of poverty in the biblical story. And as we unpack that, what the Bible teaches is the following: that every human being, regardless of income level, is made in the image of God, meaning that we are wired for relationship with God, with ourselves, with others, and with the rest of creation. When we experience these four relationships in the way that God designed them, we experience humanness the way that He intended. This is the good life that we're all seeking. Unfortunately, the fall has broken these four relationships for all people. For some, this brokenness manifests itself in material poverty. For others, the brokenness manifests itself differently. But if poverty is rooted in broken relationships, then it's going to require a long-term process to reconcile relationships, to get at the root causes of poverty. It's not about throwing resources at people, it's about walking with people in reconciling ways. Now stop and think. If poverty is rooted in broken relationships with God, self, others, and the rest of creation, you can't solve poverty in a 1 or 2 week trip. Reconciling relationships takes far longer than that. You can't solve poverty in a 1 or 2 week trip, but you sure can make it worse through how you act and through the things that you say. In reality, poverty alleviation happens through local organizations and local ministries that are able to be there over the long haul. It's those local ministries, those local organizations that are able to engage in the long-term process of effective poverty alleviation. Which means that we need a fundamentally different set of expectations and goals for our short-term trips, because we can't alleviate poverty in the space of those 1 or 2 week trips. We need new notions of what success is for a short-term missions trip. Number one, We've got to start thinking about short-term missions trips, about learning about poverty and missions, learning from the materially poor because they have a lot to teach us, learning from our brothers and sisters who are engaged in effective poverty alleviation work in their own communities, learning about our brothers and sisters' worlds, about their histories, their cultures, their economic systems, about the causes of poverty. Number 2, it's about fellowship, spending time with our brothers and sisters, being with them, rather than focusing so much on doing. I have a really hard time with that when I want to go and do things, but it's more about being. Number 3, it's about encouragement. Encouraging and blessing those who are working there over the long haul. Folks, ministry is hard work. Those who are involved in ministry are often discouraged. Poverty alleviation is one step forward, half a step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It's hard, grueling work. And those who are involved in that kind of work get discouraged and they're tired. And what they really need are people to come alongside of them and encourage them and say to them, we believe in you. We believe in what you're doing. We want to support you over the long haul. There's a lot of power in encouragement. The next step is long-term engagement. This trip has to be one piece of a long-term process of exploring our role in supporting and engaging in poverty alleviation, both around the world and in our own communities. If we do not follow through with this long-term process of engagement, we are poor stewards of the resources that have been invested in this trip. This is why preparing for the trip well and then following up on the trip is absolutely essential. It's a long-term process. This trip is only one little piece of that longer process of pre-trip training and post-trip follow-up. These may be different goals than the ones that you originally had when you decided to go on this trip, but they are powerful goals nonetheless. They are powerful goals for the materially poor, for the ministries that you're partnering with, and for yourselves. This is why we believe that we should even move away from calling these trips short-term missions trips. Because you're really not going to do missions, you're going to walk alongside of those who can do missions. First, we have to reflect on the ways that our good intentions can actually harm the materially poor. You see, folks, good intentions are not enough. It's possible to hurt the poor in the very process of trying to help them. Then we can move forward in helping without hurting in short-term missions.
I hope this session has helped you change your perspective on poverty and caused you to reconsider the purpose of short-term trips. Maybe the most effective thing we can do isn't giving the poor material things, but rather learning about supporting others as they engage in the long-term process of poverty alleviation. Right now, you and your team are going to work together through your participants' guides. You will share what you have learned today and go much deeper into correctly diagnosing poverty. See you next time.
All right. So you have a place in your book to write down 2 or 3 ideas that struck you in this video and what questions that you might have after seeing this video. Okay. You can continue writing a little bit later. I'd like to hear some feedback. How many of you would have defined poverty before you watched this or read in your book? How many of you would have defined poverty as broken relationships? A couple. I would not have. I did not. I watched this and I said, oh goodness. I've been approaching poverty alleviation very differently. What are some ideas that struck you guys from watching this? Yeah. So these gentlemen here, they teach at Covenant College, which is like maybe 40 minutes away from here. And I attended a class that they taught. I think it was Brian that said, his daughter came home and she said, Dad, I went to lunch and nobody wanted to sit with me and I felt very lonely. And he said, I could have said, well, here's some money. Hope you feel better about that. And left. How would that have helped his daughter? Would that have helped his daughter? No. Because what kind of poverty was she experiencing? Yes. So she was experiencing a poverty of community. She felt like she did not have a community. So a dad saying, here you go, kid. Here's some money. I hope that fixes that. This isn't for real. This is a donation from Andrew for this illustration. So what did his daughter really need? Kaylee? Yeah. So his daughter wasn't saying, Dad, I'd really like $5 right now. His daughter was saying, come sit beside me and help me feel that I matter and that I'm not alone. And so, but we often do that kind of thing in poverty alleviation. We say, oh my goodness, there are poor people. Let's give them all the clothes that we have, when in fact they may be fine with the clothes that they have, and they're just looking for someone to invest in sitting down and really speaking with them. I went to Brazil, I think 7 years ago now. We helped to build a church in Brazil. Who thinks that I just have amazing construction skills? And that's why I went to build this church in Brazil. Anyway, Andrew, because he works for me, is very nice and thinks that I have great construction skills. I, in fact, do not have amazing construction skills. And I realized that I wasn't there really to build a church. There were 4 Adventists, I think, in this community. And I was really there to just help show them that there are more Adventists than this one community that was so physically isolated because of where they were in the Amazon River. They really thought that they were the only 4 Adventists in the world. So to see like our group come and there was like Koreans and Hispanics and Caucasians and black students, they thought, wow, this really is a world church and I'm a part of it. And that's what I was going for. I wasn't there because I knew how to swing a hammer especially well. And so I want to echo what Mr. Fickert was saying here. We really just need a fundamentally different set of goals. And you may be doing some things like building a church, but it's more than that. And it's more about the relationships than just the people that come to your clinic or the kids that come through your VBS program. And it's much more about the relationships. Any other questions or comments from the video? No. Okay. Well, we will go on here. All right, some numbers and statistics. Okay, 2 to 3 million people is the 2010 estimate of how many people from the United States go on short-term mission trips internationally each year. 20 to 25%, the likelihood of any given church member going on an international STM sometime in their lifetime as of 2009. $1,370 to $1,450 per person, the range of average cost for an international STM. $1.6 billion, a conservative estimate of international STM spending per year. That's $1.6 billion. 4 million people, the number of the world's extreme poor whose yearly income would equal the $1.6 billion spent on international STMs in 1 year. 3,000 to 6,000 per year. The range of a yearly salary for a community-level relief and development worker in the majority world. An STM of 15 people at $1,400 per person would spend $21,000, an amount that could support 3 to 7 staff members for a year. So out of the numbers above, write down what statistics surprise you the most and why. All right, and given this reality, how do you justify using God's money to go on this trip? To continue on page 11, it says, so why go? As we will see throughout these lessons, the purpose of a trip isn't primarily about what you will do or what impact you will have in 2 weeks. It's about what you can learn in deep and meaningful ways and how that learning can translate into long-term engagement in the world of missions and poverty alleviation. Redefining poverty. How we define poverty will heavily influence how we respond to and attempt to alleviate that poverty. Take a moment to review the table below of commonly cited causes and responses to poverty. If we believe the primary cause of poverty is a lack of knowledge, then we will primarily try to what? Educate the poor. Yeah, good. Okay, let's do this again. If you believe the primary cause of poverty is oppression by powerful people, then we will primarily try to work for social justice. If we believe the primary cause of poverty is the personal sins of the poor, then we will primarily try to evangelize and disciple the poor. And if we believe poverty is caused by a lack of material resources, then we will primarily try to, right, give material resources. So look back at your answers to the preliminary questions. Do your answers about poverty tend to emphasize one of these particular categories above? And then of that table, which do you think short-term trips most frequently try to address? What do you guys think? Lack of knowledge, material resources, personal sins, or oppression? Yeah. Okay. I'm going to give you time at the end of class to go over this complexity counts part here. We're going to move forward a little bit. Okay. Here we go. Poverty in that box right there at the bottom of 13. Poverty is the result of relationships that do not work, that are not just, that are not for life, that are not harmonious or enjoyable. Poverty is the absence of shalom in all its meanings. All right. I'll go ahead and read a little bit more. Okay. Remember, because the fall impacted everything, both individual and people and systems are broken. The brokenness in the four relationships means social, political, economic, and religious systems are marred by sin. Thus, poverty alleviation also involves transforming those systems. Sometimes people blame choices made by the materially poor for their poverty, arguing that anyone could escape poverty if they really wanted to. While sinful individual choices can contribute to poverty, poverty is also the result of circumstances outside the control of the materially poor. For example, consider the prevalence of poverty in many U.S. cities. Many neighborhoods bear the marks of centuries of racial discrimination and damaging economic, social, and political policies. What happens when society crams historically oppressed, undereducated, unemployed, and relatively young human beings into high-rise buildings, provides them with inferior education, healthcare, and employment systems, and then establishes financial disincentives for work? Is it really that surprising that we see out-of-wedlock pregnancies, broken families, violent crimes, and drug trafficking? Yes, those choices are still wrong, but they have a context. Both broken systems and broken individual choices contribute to poverty. Part of the learning process of a short-term trip entails recalibrating our hearts and minds, moving away from easy but incomplete and unbiblical assumptions about the materially poor. Learning about and acknowledging the complexity of poverty, particularly in the community you will be visiting, is an essential part of long-term engagement in poverty and mission alleviation. When you interact with the materially poor, do you tend to see their poverty more as a result of their personal actions or circumstances beyond their control? Let's take a minute to write that. Okay. Right now, guys, I'm going to share a little bit with you about kind of my journey through poverty alleviation. That'll give you some more time to wrap this up. Okay, this is it. This is me falling in love with missions. My first mission trip was in 1999. Some of you guys were not in school yet, but that's okay. I was at Walker Memorial Academy in Avon Park, Florida, went on my first mission trip. So this is where I first fell in love with serving as the hands and feet of Jesus. Then I came across, have you guys seen this ADRA's really useful gift catalog? Okay, for those of you that don't know, it's a little book, a little booklet, and inside is like crazy things that you would not find in a normal gift catalog, like buy a goat for a family in Bolivia, pay for vaccines, just things like that. And that's when I first became introduced to ADRA. And I thought, I cannot believe that people actually get paid to help other people. This is amazing. I'm going to work in this field. Then I came to Southern in 2004 with the idea of working for ADRA. Fell in love with Southern. Haven't left. So I was the community service director here my junior and senior years, and really started like connecting with the community. I called all of the organizations and found out what the community needs were, and then I sent students to do projects. That used to be a student position, and now it's a faculty position. So the second year that I ran that program, the different nonprofits would tell me, you know, it's so great that you guys come in January on this one day, but actually our fundraiser is in the fall, or we actually do this clothing drive in March. Can we get volunteers to come then? And I realized as a senior nonprofit administration student, I also didn't have a whole lot of time to volunteer, but I was here taking these classes, like a web design class, and I thought, well, I'm not going to make a web design for any old thing if I know these organizations that could actually use it. If I'm going to make a public relations campaign, I'm not going to do it about why everyone should love puppies, but I'm going to do it for this real organization that has this real need. So that was my epiphany my senior year. I started doing all of my senior projects for real organizations in the community. Then, as I was leaving Southern, I went to all of the vice presidents here and I made a presentation for how we should integrate service with academics and how that's like a win-win because students have these projects anyway, and there's these community organizations that could really use students to be more involved. Students gain real-world experience, would open the doors for internships and jobs in the future. Anyway, I thought this was like revolutionary. Turns out it's called service learning. And I was hired 2 months later to start Southern's service learning program. So I came to Southern. Oh, this was my senior year here. We had no such uQuest anything program. So I decided I was going to plan a mission trip. This is me pulling plastic over a greenhouse. So the project was build a greenhouse for a Adventist hospital and for the 2 communities on either side. So there it is. You can see we did it. That's little me sitting down there. This was with Enactus, formerly SAU. So we get there. There is no pre-made greenhouse kit. We are literally drawing out the angles, the pitch, and the everything because we're going to buy all the materials and weld this thing from nothing. So here we are making this greenhouse. You see I'm not in any of these pictures, right, guys? It's not my skill. Okay, there I am painting. Yeah. I'm painting the greenhouse that other people welded. And then, so there we go. It was great, right? We accomplished our goal. Except that every day that we left the hospital compound, there was the hospital was in a gate. And when we drive out of the campus, I'd see like a group of like 30 guys right outside the hospital. And I finally asked the bus driver, it's the same guys. I said, what are these guys doing? It is literally 110 degrees outside. We're like, why are they just sitting out here every day, all day? And he said, oh, Melissa, they're just looking for work. They would do anything to put food on the table for their families. And I cried like a little girl because all these people in blue shirts, it probably cost us $30,000 to go there. And obviously, since we were in Africa, we went on a safari. And I thought I could have hired that whole community and they would have done a far better job building that greenhouse. And it would have been their greenhouse. And they would have been able to feed their families, like, I don't know, maybe for the year, like for a long time. And it was then that I realized, like, I'm not going on a mission trip unless I feel uniquely called and qualified to go. And so I came back to Southern, and I felt very differently about short-term missions. And not just anybody can go do any good thing for any good purpose, and that's fine. Because what I had done took away the job from the local people there. Because I could have very easily fundraised a very small portion of that and sent it and had the greenhouses built. So that's why I call it my best and worst mission trip, because it was just such a turning point in how I viewed missions and poverty alleviation. And so when the opportunity came to start a missions program here, a short-term missions program, I was really excited, but I told all of the people in charge, if I run this program, it's going to look differently than how other people might run it, because I don't want to just plan trips and have people just show up and then go and do something good. I want people to have a specific reason why they're going and something that they want to learn, and they have a unique skill set to offer, because I didn't want students to have the same experience that I did, realizing that I spent $3,000 to build a greenhouse that I didn't have any skill and purpose building. This is my calling here. to visit orphans and widows in their affliction, and to keep oneself unstained from the world. That is pure and undefiled religion. We make it something really complicated a lot of times, but I just love this verse because that's it.